When we think of pure evil, we often picture mythical monsters. But the real architects of horror aren't creatures from a storybook. They're men, and sometimes they're women. Young women. In the spring of 1939, a concentration camp built only for women opened its gates just 56 miles north of Berlin. It was called Ravensbrück. Over the next 6 years, more than 130,000 women and children were imprisoned there and subjected to starvation, torture, and murder. What made the camp unique wasn't just its prisoners, but who kept them in line. The daily terror at Ravensbrück was run, for the most part, by other women. Over 3,500 female SS guards, known as Aufseherinnen, were trained at Ravensbrück, where they learned a special kind of brutality that they would later take to other camps across the Nazi Empire. This was their school of violence. At just 19 years old, one of these women decided to trade in her dreary factory job for a guard's uniform. She was a maid from a small town who just wanted better pay and a nicer place to live. But within a few years, prisoners would go silent at the very sight of her. They would watch in horror as she and her SS lover took romantic walks, hand in hand, to watch women being beaten to death for sport. This is the story of Dorothea Binz, the young German girl who became one of the most brutal and feared female guards in the entire Nazi system, a woman her victims called La Binz. It's the story of her reign of terror and how she finally paid the price. So, how does someone become a monster? To understand that, you have to start with the person. Dorothea Binz was born on March 16, 1920, in a small, forgettable community in Brandenburg, Germany. She grew up in a lower-middle-class home and, by all accounts, had a totally ordinary childhood. But the world around her was changing. By the time she was 14, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had seized power, and their ideology was seeping into every part of German life. At age 10, Binz joined the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. There, girls were taught the Nazi ideals of womanhood: be strong, be obedient, and above all, serve the Reich. She finished school at 15 with few qualifications and got a job as a maid, which she hated. Domestic service wasn't for her. At the time, Nazi Germany was forcing young, unmarried women into mandatory labor on farms or in factories to support the war effort. It was a fate many, including Dorothea, wanted to avoid. In August of 1939, just weeks before Germany invaded Poland and kicked off World War II, 19-year-old Binz saw an ad that offered a way out. The brand new Ravensbrück women's camp near her hometown was hiring. She applied for a kitchen manager position, a respectable job with good pay and a place to live. When she showed up, though, she was told the kitchen job was gone. But the SS saw something in the determined young woman and offered her another role. On September 1, 1939, Dorothea Binz wasn't handed an apron, she was given a uniform. She had become an Aufseherin, a female overseer. She'd managed to avoid the factory, but in doing so, she had walked straight into the heart of the Nazi extermination machine. She had stepped into a world that would strip away her humanity piece by piece. The change from a disgruntled maid to a hardened killer didn't happen overnight. It was a slow descent, guided by the very system at Ravensbrück. When Binz started her training, she was put under the command of senior guards like Emma Zimmer and Maria Mandl, women who had already perfected the camp's culture of cruelty. Prisoners had their names taken away and were given numbers instead. They were sorted by colored triangles on their uniforms: red for political prisoners, yellow for Jews, black for asocials. It was the first step in stripping them of their identity, making them seem less than human in the eyes of their captors. At first, Binz's duties were simple. She supervised groups of women forced to do back-breaking labor, sawing wood, unloading heavy bricks, and clearing rubble. She was there to make sure the work got done. Beatings were a normal part of the job. Guards, many of them young women just like her, used fists, clubs, and iron bars on prisoners for the slightest mistake. In this world, cruelty wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. It was seen as a sign of strength and loyalty. Binz learned this lesson fast. She watched, she listened, and she adapted. Any pity she might have felt for the prisoners soon turned into cold detachment. As one former guard later said, "You could turn off your brain if you tried." But Dorothea Binz did more than just turn off her brain. She started to participate. She discovered that in this twisted moral universe, power was a thrill and violence was the way to get it. She stopped seeing the prisoners as people and started seeing them as objects. She had already put on the uniform. Now she was finally embracing what it stood for. The girl who just wanted a better job was now learning the art of atrocity. In the summer of 1940, less than a year after she arrived, Dorothea Binz got her first real promotion. She was made the deputy head of the camp's penal block, a place known simply as the bunker. The bunker was the center of punishment at Ravensbrück, a prison inside the prison. It was a place of torture, solitary confinement, and often death. Here, with her notoriously cruel boss, Maria Mandl, as her mentor, Binz's sadistic side was finally let loose. Life in the bunker was a nightmare. Flogging was a standard punishment. The victim was strapped to a bench and forced to count each lash out loud in German. If she made a mistake, the count started over. Binz didn't just oversee these punishments. She seemed to enjoy them. One survivor recalled how Binz personally whipped women sent to the jail. Another testified that Binz forced her to eat bread soaked in mud while crawling on the ground like a dog. This wasn't about discipline anymore. This was about absolute power over helpless people. In April 1941, Binz officially joined the Nazi Party, cementing her allegiance to the ideology that justified her cruelty. Her work in the bunker got her noticed. When Maria Mandl was promoted in 1942, Dorothea Binz, now just 22 years old, was put in charge of the entire cell block. Her power grew, and so did her crimes. She began helping SS doctors select women for horrific medical experiments, including forced sterilization and intentionally infecting wounds with gangrene to test new drugs. The bunker was Binz's kingdom. It was there she built her reputation for pure brutality, learning to pick out the weakest prisoners for the worst abuse. She was no longer a guard just following orders. She was becoming an innovator of cruelty. The power she had in the dark cells of the bunker was like a drug, and she was addicted. By 1943, Dorothea Binz was at the height of her power. She was promoted to deputy chief wardress and became known as the true star of the camp. Her terror now reached every corner of Ravensbrück. The French prisoners gave her a nickname that would stick forever, La Binz. Whenever she appeared at roll call, a dead silence would fall over the thousands of assembled women. Even looking at her was a risk. A simple glance could get you a savage beating or a one-way trip to the gas chambers. Her cruelty had no limits. She forced thousands of starving, freezing women to stand for hours during roll call in the dead of winter. She carried a whip and used it constantly, beating, slapping, and kicking women with her heavy boots for no reason at all. She often walked a German shepherd on a leash, which she would unleash on prisoners. One of the most infamous stories about her involves a pickaxe. After seeing a woman who she thought wasn't working hard enough, Binz knocked the prisoner down, grabbed a pickaxe, and hacked the woman to death. Afterward, she calmly wiped the blood off her boots, got on her bicycle, and rode away as if nothing had happened. Her personal life was just as twisted. She started a relationship with a married SS officer, Edmund Breuning. They lived in a comfortable house just outside the camp, filled with things they'd stolen from prisoners. They were known for taking romantic strolls through the camp hand in hand, often stopping to watch prisoners being flogged. They would watch the torture as if it were entertainment, laughing as they walked away. But maybe the most sinister part of Binz's reign was her role as a teacher. Ravensbrück was the main training center for all female SS guards. Binz was in charge of training over 100 new recruits at a time, turning them into killers just like herself. She taught them her methods and her brutality. One of her students was a woman named Irma Grazer, who would later become known as the hyena of Auschwitz. In this way, Binz's evil spread far beyond Ravensbrück. She was a multiplier of terror. her influence spreading like a disease through the camp system, carried by the very guards she had trained in her own image. By early 1945, the Nazi world was collapsing. The sound of Soviet artillery was getting closer, and the regime was in its final chaotic days. For the prisoners at Ravensbrück, this didn't mean relief. It meant more horror. The SS started a massive campaign to destroy all evidence of their crimes. The camp's crematorium ran day and night, and Binz was there, helping select thousands of sick and exhausted women to be sent to the gas chamber. As the Red Army closed in on Ravensbrück in late April, the SS ordered an evacuation. This was the beginning of the death marches. Tens of thousands of prisoners, already little more than skeletons, were forced to march north. Anyone who fell behind was shot on the spot. In the middle of all this chaos, as the camp she once ruled fell apart, Dorothea Binz saw her chance. She knew what would happen if the Soviets caught her. So, while thousands of her victims were being marched to their deaths, Binz abandoned her post. She got on her bicycle and fled, trying to vanish into the chaos of the collapsing Reich. But she didn't get far. On May 3, 1945, just days before Germany's final surrender, she was stopped and identified by British forces in Hamburg. The reign of La Binz was over. The 25-year-old who had held the power of life and death over so many was now a prisoner herself. Justice was finally catching up. After the war, the Allies began the massive task of holding Nazi perpetrators accountable. For the staff of Ravensbrück, that day came on December 5, 1946, in a Hamburg courthouse. At the first Ravensbrück trial, 16 former camp officials were put on trial by a British military tribunal, and there, wearing the number 5, was Dorothea Binz. The charges were clear: war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trial lasted 2 months. One by one, survivors took the stand and spoke of the horrors they had faced. They described the endless roll calls in the freezing cold, the random vicious beatings, and the constant fear she created. They told the court how she set her dog on prisoners and calmly kicked women to death. They testified about her role in the bunker, the flogging she carried out, and how she selected women for medical experiments and the gas chambers. Faced with this mountain of evidence, Binz's defense was pathetic. She admitted to hitting prisoners but claimed that no one had ever died from her beatings. Her lawyer asked for mercy, pointing to her young age, but these arguments meant nothing against the voices of her victims. Before the court, she wasn't some misguided girl. She was a cold-blooded killer. In one of her final statements, she reportedly said to an officer, "I hope you won't think that we were all evil people." On February 3, 1947, the verdict came down. Dorothea Binz was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by hanging. Facing the gallows, she made one last, desperate attempt to escape. After her plea for mercy was rejected, she tried to kill herself by slashing her wrists in her cell, but guards found her before she could bleed out. There would be no easy way out. She would have to face the executioner. On the morning of May 2, 1947, the final chapter of Dorothea Binz's life unfolded inside Hamelin prison. After years of testimony from survivors and a trial that laid bare her actions at Ravensbrück, the sentence handed down by the British military court was carried out. Binz was just 27 years old when she was brought from her cell and led toward the gallows. The execution was overseen by Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's most experienced hangman. Pierrepoint was no stranger to war crimes justice. He had already executed several convicted Nazi perpetrators, including Irma Gresse. His reputation was built on precision and speed, designed to make executions clinical rather than chaotic. This was not meant to be a spectacle, it was meant to be final. The procedure followed a strict routine. A black hood was placed over Binz's head, cutting her off from the room and the people within it. The noose was then secured around her neck. At 9:01 a.m., Pierrepoint pulled the lever. The trapdoor opened, and within seconds, Dorothea Binz's life was over. The woman once feared by prisoners at Ravensbrück had been reduced in the end to silence. But the execution itself is only the end of the story, not its meaning. What makes Dorothea Binz so disturbing is not her rank or background. She was not a top Nazi official. not a military strategist, not someone born into power or privilege. She came from an ordinary rural family and had worked as a domestic servant, a job she reportedly despised. When she joined the SS camp system, she wasn't driven by ideology alone, but by opportunity, better living conditions, authority over others, and an escape from a life she found dull and limiting. At Ravensbrück, she entered a system that didn't just tolerate cruelty, it rewarded it. Violence became a tool for advancement, and brutality was often praised rather than punished. Survivors later described how Binz went beyond orders. Her cruelty wasn't mechanical or detached, it was personal. Witnesses said she mocked prisoners, took pleasure in their suffering, and laughed during acts of violence. This was not simply obedience, it was participation. And that leads to the most unsettling question her story leaves behind. How does this happen? How does a 19-year-old woman, frustrated with her life and searching for something more, transform into someone capable of such sustained cruelty? There is no single answer. Historians point to a dangerous mix, an ideology that stripped victims of their humanity, a system that gave unchecked power to young guards, and personal traits that, once unleashed, were encouraged rather than restrained. In another time, those impulses might have remained hidden. In Nazi Germany, they were cultivated. Dorothea Binz's story is a chilling reminder that great evil is not always carried out by distant masterminds or famous leaders. Sometimes it is committed by ordinary people who are given power without accountability. Her life stands as one of history's most disturbing lessons, that under the right conditions, cruelty can become routine, and the line between normality and monstrosity can disappear far faster than we like to believe.